This is The World This Weekend. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Tonight, winter slams into the West Coast, including places that haven't seen snow in decades.
Most of our residents and most of the people's cars aren't set up for any kind of snow or ice.
Also tonight, the war in Ukraine stirs protests on the streets of Europe.
Do you see all these bullet holes in the Brandenburg Gate from 70, 80 years ago? We don't want that anymore. We want peace.
And Nigerians head to the polls in a closely watched election.
This upcoming election could probably be the most crucial election in the history of Nigeria.
That's later, but first. Power outages, grounded flights, road closures. Californians are dealing with the fallout of a once-in-a-generation winter storm, which has brought with it rainfall, flooding, and heavy snow. And forecasters say the West Coast will see more rain and snow through the weekend. Philip Lee-Shannock reports.
Many California residents woke up to a winter wonderland. In the mountains outside Los Angeles, Jeremiah Dominguez was building a snowman.
Yeah, well, I live where there's no snow ever. The only snow I've got was hail in first grade, and it's pretty exciting.
Welcome to Santa Cruz!
In Northern California, beaches in Santa Cruz were covered with snow. Some, like this resident of Felton in the nearby mountains, had mixed feelings.
It was cool for a moment to look at it, and then I was the reality of oh, I have to go do things.
Roads were blocked by fallen trees that downed power lines, leaving thousands without power.
Most of our residents and most of the people's cars aren't set up for any kind of snow or ice.
Matt Machado is director of Santa Cruz County Public Works. He says the regional utility, Pacific Gas and Electric, has been deluged with calls.
They're having a hard time responding to every situation, every location, so we're trying to assist and get these roads back open.
In Lake Hughes, north of Los Angeles, resident Deanne Blanc worried about flooding.
I think that is one of the biggest concerns is we are looking at a lot of rainfall, snow. The snow will melt and the wind, and we worry about the mudslides and the flooding since we've had it twice already.
The U.S. National Weather Service issued flash flood warnings for more than 6 million people, including those in the Los Angeles area. Richard Thompson is with the service. He says there's a silver lining for the drought-stricken state.
Given we're coming, still dealing with a multi-year drought and so forth, it's been a very beneficial winter for us to get all this rain and snow that we've seen so far the last several months.
North of the border, British Columbia is also bearing the brunt of a slow-moving winter storm. Amy Sidwell is the manager of street operations with the city of Vancouver. She says, unlike in California, snow events are not uncommon, so there is a plan.
So our priority routes are firstly our major roads around the city, and then once we have those stabilized, we're moving on to our other priorities, which are our 16 most used bike lanes, our 4 major pedestrian pathways.
Environment Canada says heavy snow is expected across much of British Columbia. Significant snowfall warnings have been issued for Vancouver, the Sunshine Coast, and Vancouver Island. Philip Lee-Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
Behind a banner that reads "Stand with Ukraine," dozens of Russian Canadians demonstrate outside of the Russian consulate in Montreal. Many wave the blue and yellow Ukrainian flag. Olga Babina is with the Russian-Canadian Democratic Alliance and helped organize this anti-war march.
Poutine a commencé cette guerre et il a dit que toutes les Russes sont...
Putin started this war and he claimed that all Russians are in agreement, but it is not true. Many Russian people and Russian Canadians are against the war. We are against this invasion.
Participants are calling for Moscow to withdraw its troops from Ukraine and for the dismantling of the Russian government, which they say is illegitimate. Well, the anniversary of the war in Ukraine is stirring up strong emotions around the world. In Berlin today, 10,000 people showed up to protest, but not in support of Western governments sending weapons to Ukraine. They say it's far more complicated than that. Rebecca Collard reports.
Thousands of Germans gathered in central Berlin today with a message for their government. Stop sending weapons to Ukraine.
Do you see all these bullet holes in the Brandenburg Gate? Right there? All these bullet holes from 70, 80 years ago? We don't want that anymore. We don't need that. We don't want that. We want peace.
Standing among the crowd at Brandenburg Gate today, Jürgen, a protester in his 60s, points to the scars of war still visible in Berlin and to his country's history. For decades after World War II, Germany had a policy of not sending lethal weapons to active conflict zones. But with the war in Ukraine, Germany has upended that.
Because this is too dangerous. We are playing with fire here.
Jürgen says the protest in Berlin today is important because it united Germans across the political spectrum with a common message. They want their government to send diplomats to Ukraine rather than heavy weapons. As the war in Ukraine enters its second year, there is a divide in Europe over the conflict. As protesters in Berlin oppose military assistance to Ukraine, in Paris today, hundreds took to the streets, hoisting Ukrainian flags and signs that say, "Arms for Ukraine and stop Putin." We are first and foremost fighting for Russian troops to pull out of all of Ukraine, says protester Marina Sanchez amid a sea of Ukrainian flags at the protest in Paris. We support both the armed and unarmed resistance of the Ukrainian people. To mark the one-year anniversary, the European Union adopted a 10th round of sanctions against 121 individuals and entities and banned what it calls Russian propaganda outlets. And while leaders pledged to continue support, Europeans have also been the most affected by the conflict, hosting millions of Ukrainian refugees and paying higher energy prices. And at the protest in Berlin, those sanctions aren't popular either. Most are holding flags and banners calling for peace, but others hold Russian flags. Until just a few decades ago, Germany was still divided between a Soviet-influenced East and the West. The Berlin Wall stood just meters from where the protesters gathered today. Michael was 18 when the wall came down. He grew up in the east part of Berlin and believes the West provoked the war by increasing NATO's presence on Russia's borders.
It's all about the NATO east expansion.
Western leaders have repeatedly said the only way to reach peace with Russia is to better arm Ukraine and pressure Moscow into talks. But most here disagree with that.
Send weapons and tanks and other things, and because you will not end the war, you will keep it going on.
And for now, that war is still very much ongoing. Rebecca Collard for CBC News, Berlin.
The polls have now closed in Nigeria's tight presidential election. The logistics alone are staggering. Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation, and a record 93.5 million people are registered to vote. There are more than 12,000 candidates, 18 of them for the presidency, and more than 176,000 polling stations. Nigerians living in Canada are watching closely. Segun Oke lives in Winnipeg.
I think this election is crucial because Nigeria is either on the brink of fail or pass, and then if the decisions are made correctly, it could see improvements in Nigerian situation by probably 10 to 15%.
But the election comes at a difficult time, with Nigeria facing major economic and security issues, including high inflation, cash and fuel shortages, and terror attacks. On Wednesday, suspected separatists carried out attacks that killed several people, including a Senate candidate, and today there were some episodes of violence at polling stations. For more on all of it, I spoke with Nduka Orjinmo. He's a senior journalist with the BBC, based in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. I started by asking him what's at stake in this election.
What's at stake is the future of the country. 210 million people, Africa's largest economy, Africa's most populous country. And to put it quite frankly, a country that has not really lived up to its potentials. At the moment, we're struggling with a crumbling economy and widespread insecurity. And most people feel that it's time for something to give way.
And with regards to the young people, the youth vote is a major factor in this election, right? It's something like of those 93 million registered voters, 40% of them are under the age of 35. And yet the most prominent candidates that we're seeing are in their 60s and 70s. So how are they connecting with younger voters?
Well, that's one reason why most of the voters are now connecting with the candidate of the Labour Party, Peter Obi, who is relatively young by Nigerian standard. He's 61 years old compared to the others who are in their 70s. And there is this huge gulf between the leaders and this very young population that we have in the country.
So what is it? What has Peter Obi done to connect with young people?
He's quite unusual for a Nigerian politician. He's very humble, and most young people feel that through him, they see a new Nigeria, one where leaders are much more accountable to the people. And what he's done is to really connect with this young Nigerian population. But the ruling party has a man who is seen by many here as a master political strategist. His name is Bola Tinubu, and he used to be the governor of Nigeria's commercial hub, Lagos. And he left a legacy there of building infrastructure in Lagos, and quadrupling the internally generated revenue of the state. So people think that he's the man that Nigeria needs to revive its economy. Now, the main opposition, People's Democratic Party, ruled Nigeria for 16 years, from 1999 to 2015. And its candidate is a former vice president of Nigeria, Atiku Abubakar. He's been contested for office to be president since 1993. And this is his sixth time going for that office. So if he doesn't get it this time, most people feel that it will be his last shot at office. He's quite popular in the north, and that's where you have the largest voting bloc in Nigeria. That's where the big votes are. And people are thinking that if you can get those votes in the north, then that would be a path to victory for him.
What are some of the other issues that are top of mind for voters in the country?
Two big issues, or three, I would say, because one is recent. The first one is the economy, and Nigeria's economy is crumbling. We have inflation at record levels, 21% as at last month. So people can't really get value for their money in Nigeria again. That's the first thing. The second thing is widespread insecurity. Last year alone, 10,000 people were killed in Nigeria. 5,000 people were actually kidnapped. So there's a huge insecurity. You have what you call bandits in the northwest. If you go to the northeast, you have insurgents, Islamist insurgents. And in the southeast, you have separatists who want to create a Biafran country. Now, the third issue is quite recent. The government redesigned the Naira notes, the local currency. However, it's been chaotic since. People cannot access their own money through the banks because most of the new notes printed are not even available because people were really fed up with the system. So those three issues are what is really driving voters going into the election.
All right, we'll be watching to see what happens. Thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
Nduka Orjinmo is a senior journalist with the BBC in Abuja, Nigeria. Finance chiefs of the world's largest economies met in Bengaluru, India today for a G20 gathering, where they revealed sharp differences over the war in Ukraine. While most of the ministers signed on to a statement condemning the invasion because of its impact on supply chains, energy and food insecurity, and global financial instability, China and Russia declined to sign off on it. Russia's finance minister did not attend the G20 meeting, but sent deputies instead. In Finland, Indigenous advocates faced bitter disappointment this week as a years-long push to change how Sami membership is defined ended in failure. From Inari, Finland, John Last has this report, produced with the support of the Pulitzer Center.
Blanketed in fresh snow under gray skies, the Arctic village of Inari is the picture of calm. But for months, it's been at the heart of a bitter debate in Finnish society over who can and who should be considered Indigenous. This is the heartland of Finland's Sami people, members of Europe's only recognized Indigenous group. But it's also long been home to Laplanders, ethnic Finns who practice the same rural livelihoods, like reindeer herding, as their Sami neighbors. And since the 1990s, a loophole in Finland's law has allowed descendants of these Laplanders to claim Indigenous status.
This kind of livelihood practicing doesn't build an automatic relationship to the ethnicity.
Tuomas Aslak-Juuso is the president of Finland's Sami parliament. He says the law needs to be changed to define the Sami community more narrowly based on connections to Sami languages. That puts him at odds with people like Mirja Mattila.
If someone takes this identity, I am lost. I am totally lost.
She represents the Association for the Original Sami of Finland, a group that is claiming Sami identity. She says her members lost their language as a result of Finnish colonialism. But experts say that groups like hers fail to meet most definitions of an indigenous people and may be covering a more nefarious intent.
The origins of these groups are really quite clearly anti-Sami. Or anti-Sami rights, let's say that.
Laura Junka-Aikio is a professor of Northern politics at the University of Lapland. She says these groups originate with, quote, self-indigenized Finns, tied to the logging and mining interests that have tried to stall progress towards Sami land rights and self-determination. She says they've sown distrust of Sami institutions and may soon gain control of the levers of power within them. That's why advocates poured everything into this year's attempt to reform the law, gaining the support of the United Nations, tens of thousands of Finns, and the country's progressive Prime Minister, Sanna Marin. But on Friday, after years of campaigning, they were handed a bitter disappointment.
I just broke down, basically.
Petra Laiti is chair of Finland's Sami Youth Council. She was at a pro-Sami protest when she heard the news. The reform bill died quietly in committee Friday morning, victim of divisions within the governing coalition, which includes a party backed by rural Lapland voters. Sami leaders must now wait until after a spring election to try again, and it will likely be under a less progressive government. But Laiti worries that Sami youth like her might not have another fight left in them.
When you've already given everything, what else do you have to give?
For CBC News in Inari, I'm John Last.
The Japanese government is trying to get families to leave the world's largest urban area. It's offering tens of thousands of dollars if they move from the Tokyo region to almost anywhere else in the country. As the CBC's Chris Corday explains, it's the latest attempt to stop the decline of rural Japan.
Families are packed on a children's train as it does a loop at Tokyo's Setagaya Park. Space is always at a premium in this city that's notorious for crowds, but many parents say you can't pay them enough to leave. It's hard to move because of my husband's job, says Risa Kurokata, a working mother with a toddler. His headquarters are in Tokyo. It's not realistic for us to live outside the city, she says. Japan's government has been struggling to deal with overcrowding in Greater Tokyo, population 37 million. But policymakers also want to stem the tide of young people flooding into the capital from the rest of the country, where aging and shrinking municipalities are on the brink of extinction. Now they're trying to lure people back to the regions with cash. Families will get up to $50,000 Canadian if they move out of Tokyo for at least 5 years. The offer is making headlines, but experts think it won't cause change.
It's not a very much amount of money. It's insignificant.
Anthropologist John Mock has lived in Japan for 35 years and studied depopulation. He thinks the government has good intentions with the subsidy, but he says it's putting the cart before the horse.
So if you wanted to actually go after this, it seems to me you'd have to do some very serious things about, for example, childcare, urban development, getting jobs. Families are going to move if they can find a job.
But even without the incentive, some are seeing signs of a shift as people reconsider the advantages of living outside Tokyo, like cheaper housing and an escape from Japan's rigid work culture. In 2021, for the first time ever, more people left Tokyo than moved in, a trend likely caused by an increase in remote work during the pandemic. Living in Tokyo and working for a big company is not everyone's dream anymore, says Hiroshi Takahashi, founder of the Hometown Relocation Support Center. It's a non-profit that helps urbanites move to smaller communities. It fielded a record 52,000 inquiries last year. Takahashi thinks it reflects changing values, especially among Japan's younger generations. Over the last 10 years, the majority of people who want to leave Tokyo are in their 20s to 40s. The reason is that what they want out of life has diversified, he says. The government's goal for the subsidy is downright modest. It wants 10,000 people per year to leave Tokyo. It may be a drop in the bucket considering the scale of the problems, but at the very least, it's leading some to consider a different path. Chris Corday, CBC News, Tokyo.
A Canadian athlete has made history at the Freestyle World Ski Championships in Georgia.
To the bottom jump, here's Kingsbury. The cork, 1080, and he lands it. Kingsbury crosses the line. Score coming in, 89.82, your world champion. Kingsbury has done it again.
Quebec's Michael Kingsbury has become the first person to win 4 gold medals in the singles moguls at the World Championships. He beat out Australia's Matt Graham by less than 1 point to take the top spot. Kingsbury won his first gold medal in the singles moguls 10 years ago. Tomorrow, he'll compete in the dual moguls, and if he places first, he'll become the first person to win 4 golds in that event, too. Well, it is Milan Fashion Week, the time of year when top designers, movie and music stars, influencers, and fashionistas gather in the northern Italian city to watch new collections be launched. For the first time ever, a group of Indigenous designers from Canada will be showing their creations, everything from evening gowns and bomber jackets to beaded visors and jewelry. Megan Williams tells us more from Milan.
The clothing and jewelry by the Indigenous designers on display here at Milan Fashion Week make for a playful, profound, and eclectic Milan debut. They're the stunning three-dimensional raised beadwork earrings by Haudenosaunee designer Nio Perkins.
This one is newly named Celestial Earring. They feel like a star, right?
And a baseball jacket by Section 35 designer Justin Lewis, with a polka dot pony sewn on the back, leaping over the words, "Made on Stolen Land."
I grew up with horses, riding horses. My dad was a cowboy, and they're a big part of our culture as well. And
this first Indigenous group show from Canada in Milan is nothing short of a triumph of the imagination and hard work on the part of designers, but also a pulling together to help each other change perceptions of what constitutes fashion. Sage Paul is artistic and executive director of Indigenous Fashion Arts and a tireless promoter of Indigenous designers. She says many face not just economic and social challenges at home, but in the fashion market here in Europe, misconceptions.
There is the idea of the prairie Indian with the straight hair, feather, headdress, and that kind of thing. So, really trying to push through that and share what is happening in our cultures today. There's so many influences, and so of course we're going to see many different things, and it's very vibrant.
Other designs include futurist visors framed by elaborate beadwork by Dene Métis artist Robin McLeod, and a long sheer dress with a delicate cascade of aquamarine feather flowers by Anishinaabe designer Leslie Hampton.
Having garments that allow you to experience whatever new body you are, or if it was more of a mental change that you went through, having pieces that empower you and make you happy.
Hand embroidered mesh, the fringe at the end, and a glass bead to give it some weight.
Designer Evan Ducharme shows off his bestseller mesh shirt inspired by the Métis sash. Like all the Indigenous designers here at Milan Fashion Week, he's beyond thrilled at this chance to expand into the international market.
The young version of me who left St. Ambrose at 18 with 2 hockey bags and a hope and a dream, they're ecstatic. This is everything that I could have ever imagined for myself.
But he says the biggest joy is showing alongside other Indigenous designers producing work at such a high level.
And to show that here in Milan is priceless.
Megan Williams, CBC News, Milan.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. A year into Russia's war on Ukraine, many different fronts of the conflict have been revealed, not only geographically. In the sporting world, for instance, we've seen mounting calls for Russian and Belarusian athletes to be blocked from next year's Paris Olympic Games. Arts and culture have also been affected, but not as talked about. Sarah Larniak looked into that.
This was very interesting, this project. NFT one, but this is not simple NFT project. They raise money for charity.
Alice Juravel is many things: a humanitarian, a refugee, and an artist.
So yes, I did abstract artwork in my style about about our land tragedy. Very important territory right now destroyed for harvest.
This piece was her contribution to an art history project run by the Ukrainian government. The project creates a timeline of the war. Works are then sold to raise funds for the preservation of Ukraine's cultural institutions, many of which have been targeted by Russian bombs. For Juravel, it's a welcome return to the art world.
Art is my hobby, but before the full-scale invasion, art was part of my life, much bigger than hobby. It was my work.
Some people felt their art needed to be put on hold when the war began. Others have used it as their primary fighting tool.
My name is Marta Trotyuk. I live in Ukraine, in Lviv, and I'm a gallerist. I'm an art curator, and also I'm a president of a gallerist association in my city. On the 5th day of the full-scale invasion, we met with my colleagues, gallerists, in one gallery, and we started to discuss with colleagues what can we do to help our country, but using our knowledge and power and contacts what we have. And we decided to enroll in these cultural diplomacies.
For Trotyuk, this has meant traveling around the world advocating for cultural sanctions to be put in place, barring Russian artists, dancers, and sports teams from their respective fields. Instead, she asks for Ukrainians to be put in the spotlight.
Another artist, I went to Taiwan with her. Her name is Zirka Savka.
Mounted on her wall, Trotyuk has one of Savka's older paintings, bright, vivid pinks. But on her phone, she shows what Savka's newer work looks like.
So it was a bit huge.
That's not comparable.
Yes. It's different.
It feels violent or something.
Yeah.
It's not about the war, but it feels violent.
It's graphic.
Yeah.
Before, she also used this kind of style, but not this, this tense, this emotional, hard emotional, and so on. That's how art changed for many artists.
Yeah. Ukrainian art is serving as a cultural diary for this painful chapter in the country's history. But perhaps one day it will also help the nation to heal. Sarah Larniuk, CBC News, Lviv.
That's the Ukrainian national anthem, sung by Ukrainian soloists at New York City's Metropolitan Opera last night. It was a special performance from the Met to mark the anniversary of the war, called For Ukraine, a concert of remembrance and hope. It also featured Canadian mezzo-soprano Emily D'Angelo singing Mozart's Requiem. The 28-year-old from Toronto took the stage wearing a long black dress, the skirt covered in white tally marks like on a chalkboard, 365 of them to mark 1 year of the war.
Рік повномасштабної війни – це не та дата, яку хочеться відзначати.
A year of full-scale war is not a date we want to mark, Ukrainian First Lady Olena Zelenska told the crowd, because it is a year of attack, aggression, and murder, a year of hell. She went on to say, you have proven that art can help and save, and that she hopes to soon celebrate the victory of humanity, of art, of Ukraine. The moving ending, a hymn called Prayer for Ukraine by Ukrainian composer Valentin Silvestrov. Written during the 2014 conflict, its words, Lord, protect Ukraine, give us power, faith, and hope, still resonating today. You've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.